let's go ahead and kick this off then. Katie, do you want to get us going?
Sure. So, Margaret, if you go to the next slide, I'll just say how you can participate if you want to participate. You can use the raised hand function that is on the bottom right of your little tools and that you can see on the screen there, or you can use the question box to type in comments or to ask questions. But everything that you do right in there will be sent to the entire group, and we will save those questions and post those on the website as well. So don't worry, everything will be saved through that process. So if you want to communicate during the call, raise your hand or ask a question. And I think that everyone's aware, you received the update about what we're going to be covering during this hour of the call. So this is a two-part kind of call today. From 1 to 2, we're going to be focusing on allocation rules, which is why those of you who are on the phone are probably joining this one in particular. And then for the second hour, we are going to focus on states that have limited or less data. So if you're on from 1 to 2, you are here to learn about allocation options. So we're going to start today with some more examples from some different SEAs that submitted data over the past couple of weeks. Then Marguerite's going to talk through some allocation options, and then we'll close by talking briefly about the in-person meeting and any next steps.
And you're welcome to stay for both. Absolutely, and you may find that they're both interesting. We just want to let you off the hook if you don't have 2 hours to put toward this today. Okay, so you might see on your screen a meme. Katie, I can't hear you, so I'll jump right in. Remember we said we were doing our goofy memes as part of this. We found this one. Know that allocation will show 80%, and that's final. So that actually ended up being a good one for today's topic, and I think you'll see why as we go forward on this. But we wanted to start off with jumping in and looking at some of the data that 4 states submitted since last time we all spoke. And the first one is Wyoming. So remember that we had put a challenge out to the states to say, grab some data from your system, whatever you have, and see how closely you can populate this table. Katie, maybe you want to walk us through what we got on these?
Sure. Yeah. So we sent this challenge out, and Wyoming responded. And I don't see that Kim is on the call, but Kim Morrow from Wyoming. If you are on the call and I'm just not seeing it, you can raise your hand, and we can unmute you, and you're welcome to share your process in doing this. But Wyoming uses a essential expenditure allocation where they sum all the essential expenditures and they divide by total enrollment and then assign LEA PPE pretty uniformly across all the schools. So in that LEA middle section, LEA level, you'll see that the federal is the same for that elementary school number 1 and elementary school number 2, and the state and local essential amount is the same for both schools as well. So that's one allocation method that we're going to be going through a little bit today. And as you can also see on that total there, you can see the percentage, that's $3,227. That's in the first school, it captures 19% of their total PPE, and then in the second school, it captures 23% of their total PPE. So same dollar amount across both schools for people, but it's capturing a different amount of funding depending on how much is already allocated to the school level for those particular schools.
And I think
so again,
I think what we're just to chime in a little bit. In other words, if you're looking at 19% was at the LEA. That means the other 81% was captured at the school level. So really, in the Wyoming file, you can see that a lot of the spending was able to be captured at the school level. So those as you'll see from a lot of the examples, those are that's solid when you think about the functions that districts do, that they were able to capture so much of their spending down at the school level.
Great. Thanks, Marguerite.
And do we have anyone from Wyoming? Did you want to chime in? You're welcome to use the question box or raise your hand.
Deborah. Okay. Deborah, you're unmuted. You should be able to talk.
Now.
Hi, this is Kim from Wyoming.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, Kim.
Yeah, I was just going to give a brief overview. We do have a common chart of accounts. All districts are supposed to report every expenditure to a school level, or we call it a target ID, same thing as a school level. Obviously, there are some times or some expenditures that we allow them to report it at the district level, so the target ID is actually the district code. So what we did in this sample is we tried to pull in those expenditures that are outlined in the ESSA guidelines. If by chance a school did code this particular one of these expenditures to a district level, then it was part of the roll-up to the LEA level. But if they did in fact code an expenditure to a school level, then that's reflected in this worksheet that you have.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're doing a pretty good job of coding expenditures to the school level, though. If you had, really roughly 80% are showing up at the school level.
Right, and we just thought we would try to help train or provide guidance going forward to get them to do it to the school level more if they can.
Yep.
So.
Terrific.
Yep.
Great. Well, that will come in handy as we move through and talk about allocation in a minute. But we have a few others. Florida, similar kind of thing. You'll see that the grand totals here are quite a bit lower on a per pupil basis, and actually a really small portion of the money is left at this LEA level. So the vast majority is at the school level. And do we have anyone from? We could look at those percentages there, but do we have anyone from Florida who can chime in?
Yeah, I don't think Jeff is on today. It doesn't look like it.
Okay, that's fine. What I would say, if he was on, I think there might be missing some money, because when we look at the total current expenditures in recent F-33 files, we show higher spending in Florida. So it may be the case that there's some sort of local pool or something else like that that might be missing from these calculations, and that would be a thing to look for. But let's go ahead and move on if there isn't anyone. And if you are in Florida and chime in, we can come back to this as well. And then we have Maine. Katie, do you want to take us away on Maine?
Yeah, I'll actually unmute Tyler and let Tyler explain kind of his analysis here. He did two districts, one of which has an elementary school and then tuition students out to other districts for secondary, and the other district which has an elementary and secondary. So you can go ahead, Tyler. You should be able to speak.
So we have a bunch of school districts that either don't operate an elementary school or don't operate a secondary school, or they don't operate either, and then they tuition their students out to other school districts. So I guess my challenge to a bit was how do we account for the funds that are being spent on students at a different district because they're all being tuitioned out. And then with the secondary on the school district number 2, they actually have a career and technical education program, but they don't charge other school districts tuition for the cost of that program because that school district is able to recoup all those funds through state dollars. So for efficiency's sake, they don't charge tuition. But on the flip side, it's making their per pupil look much higher.
Yeah, I see that. So there's some thorny issues that have to be sorted out if the data are going to be really meaningful for folks.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have an idea how you
can
handle
you
it?
Oh,
go ahead.
Tyler, this is Katie. I was just, Marguerite Margaret asked if you had any idea about how you're thinking about handling some of the more thorny issues that you're coming into contact with.
One thought we had was actually polling the school districts that run these CTE centers, and asking them how many students are attending the CTE center, and then taking that pool of money, because we can isolate that pool of money and divide it by the number of students attending those programs, and then adding that number into the rest of it.
I think that makes sense. And in our, we've had some written back and forth with the Department of Ed on the guidance around some of these questions. And they said how you treat enrollment for different programs and the cost for different programs is part of your state's uniform procedure. So
Okay.
you are absolutely welcome to kind of draw the line and make a decision about how that's going to work. If and I think you're right, making a decision about how that's going to work in a way that makes your data more meaningful is the right way to go.
And I think we'll note which school districts are operating a CTE center, because even with doing that, it's going to their number is still going to be higher, but at least it'll make more sense.
Yeah, I think so too. And I didn't know, do we have someone from Florida who wanted to chime in on the Florida data?
Yes, this is Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
I think it's really important to understand pretty much what we're required to do by Florida statute and Florida administrative code in the data that we provided. In Florida statute, we're required to report expenditure costs to the program level. For example, kindergarten through grade 3 is considered program 101. So we have that ability to be able to track those costs down to the program level, in addition, not only in addition to the school and to the district as a whole. The two schools that were identified here were schools within one district alone. One of the districts, one of our larger districts, Broward County, is where this data is pulled from. So in Florida Administrative Rule, we have it defined as to what constitutes school level indirect cost and also what constitutes district indirect cost. So each individual school district is required to break out their cost at the school, at the program, and specifically within those indirects as to if it's going to be school or district indirect. That is reported through a proprietary piece of software that reports it by fund. So, of course, we can break it out by federal funds and also the state and local.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like some of the money is missing.
Don't understand your statement of money is missing. These are costs that are broken out by unweighted FTE specifically. So what we've done is we've taken the total cost and divided it out by that particular school's unweighted FTE to get those numbers.
Okay. Well, let me dig in a little offline, and I could be wrong on this, but the numbers I've seen as total current expenditures elsewhere were higher than 7,700 per student. And so then I was thinking, well, I wonder, and we've seen this a lot in Florida, where I'm not going to get this right, so I really probably should stop right now, but there's one chunk of money or whatever left off on some reporting, but then it shows up on other reporting. So I don't know enough to really dig in now, but I looked at those numbers and I was thinking, well, you know, on the federal F-33 spending level is reported as higher than that. So that's what triggered the question, which is always a great way to look at your data to kind of get a pulse check on whether all the processes are working, but I 100% could be wrong on this one.
Yeah, well, I think it really does matter as to which report you're looking at. If you're looking at the annual financial report in comparison to the program cost report, then yes, you will see different numbers. You will see different presentation of the data. Our system requires us to, in essence, reconcile back to the annual financial report. So the program cost report definitely, by fund, reconciles back to that district's annual financial report. In our cost reporting system, we produce 9 individual reports. So depending upon what you're actually looking at, can significantly make a difference as to the conclusion that you can draw.
Yeah. No, I get it. I just, no, I think that's you're at the crux of it. Different financial reports collect different information, and the question is which one is this one and why are they different? But well, let's move on, and maybe you and I can dig in together a little bit and sort of come back to this one at another meeting, or maybe at the in-person meeting. I'm just sort of curious about it to figure out why I had a different perception of the total spending. So we have one other one, which was Rhode Island, and Katie, I wonder if you want to give us a quick over with this one, and Cindy, you may be on as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I do believe that Cindy is here, and she can speak about it in more detail. But Cindy actually went and ran an analysis of all the expenditures that in every district in Rhode Island, pretty in-depth analysis for us this past week. And we just took the numbers that she provided and broke them down into a sample of districts, and then did a statewide average in terms of what percentage of funds based on their allocation method and their very detailed chart of accounts are allocated to the central level across districts, and what percentage are allocated to the school level. So you all might have remembered we talked about this briefly on our last call, looking at Mississippi's data, and Mississippi saw some variation across districts in percent central and percent school level. Rhode Island has a much more detailed chart of accounts and system for allocating expenditures, and so we had hypothesized that we might see something that looked more uniform across districts, which is not the case, and there are many reasons why that might not be the case, salaries being one of them. But Cindy, is there something else you'd want to add to your analysis and what you did to get at these numbers?
Sure. We kept it pretty pure based on our chart of accounts. So when we looked at each school individually. So for an elementary school, the costs are coded directly to an elementary school level, and so if it's not an elementary school, a middle, high, in our initial analysis, we held the small handful of alternative schools to one side, and we held the Rhode Island School for the Deaf to the side, because they truly are outliers. And so we didn't want to skew the rest of the data with that, so we pulled them to the side, and then we looked at each school and we bucketed elementary, middle, high. The way our chart of accounts works, if it's not an expenditure for a student in the seat of that school, then it's a central expenditure, which is why you see the footnote at the bottom when we're talking about the local appropriation share that goes to students in charter schools, which are their own LEAs in Rhode Island, or special ed outplacements, career and tech tuitions to another district. All of those are central expenses because those students are captured at the central level in another district, and some of them in the 190 code of the district itself. So they're not in the particular school, so we're keeping that school-based per pupil very pure. So we did it on a school-by-school basis. I think these averages here are at the district level for the schools, but in every case of ours, the central level PPE that's added is the same for every school within that district, because it's a very specific bucket of costs. So it was interesting, and then I did a subset off that, which I posted or sent for posting to our FitWig site for your review, but it essentially looks at suburban district samples versus urbans, regional districts, and charter schools to just get a sense of how different they are or aren't. So if you get a chance to look at that, it's not as rolled up at a high level as this, but it's school specific. And I think when you look at that, again, you can see in each district, they're roughly in the same ballpark, but from district to district, there is significant variance.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. I saw that this morning, and maybe we can bring that into our conversation either in the in-person meeting, which I know will be attending and are looking forward to networking with some folks there, or we can bring it back on our next call, which will be February 16th. So thanks for submitting that. Margaret,
Sure.
Did you have anything else you wanted to add here?
No, I think that's I think you know what we were sort of curious is how much of the money does show up at that school level then, and again, you know, a lot of it does. What's interesting about Rhode Island is it's very consistent things show up at the school level, which is a testament to Rhode Island's very detailed chart of accounts on that. And we probably didn't bring the right data to sort of illustrate that, but that is one of the methods that we'll talk about in our allocation methodology in a little bit. There are different ways to kind of do this. We could have a chart of accounts. Well, I'll talk about that in a moment, but we were just trying to figure out how much of that money does show up, and there is a central portion here. But like Cindy said, some of that's money that ultimately gets transferred. And so, you know, that's sort of an interesting piece of it all. But anyway, I really appreciate all that work to pull that together. I know we'll be revisiting it a lot going forward. So there's 3 buckets of ways to do this. And the first one is that the state the SEA could specify certain objects or functions or even programs that need to be coded to schools. And we're going to be very clear in saying these are the kinds of objects or services or functions that must be coded down to the school level. And I would say that right now Rhode Island's the closest example to that. A second approach, and that's the second box here, would be that the state could specify a set of conditions for when costs are reported to the school level. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but conditions are like, well, it depends on maybe who's controlling the money or something like that. And the third bucket would be that the state is more neutral about what gets coded legitimately to the school level, that the LEA can choose that, but that it also asks the LEA to then apportion all other central costs, so that if one LEA only codes, you know, a smaller portion of its money to the school, will still capture the rest of that money in the LEA central portion and can add them together. So what you're really looking at is what's more comparable anyway is the big total number. And I think these are the three most viable ways. I think there'll be lots of hybrids here, but just to go down this road for a moment, if we think about the SEA, you know, decides, I'm going to say, like, this classroom teacher must be coded to the school. You know, any services that are delivered at the school must be coded to the school. Maybe transportation must be coded to the school, or transportation must not be coded to the school, or whatever. They're sort of like it's in or out, and we're going to specify it based on either some object codes in the chart of accounts or the functions in the chart of accounts. Could even be programs in the chart of accounts. And examples of that are the SLFS categories. The SLFS is the school level finance survey, and some states have participated in that. That is a Department of Ed optional collection that they've been doing, and that is asked for very specific things like instructional personnel salaries that are assigned full-time to the school would go in there. So they're very specific categories, and that would mean that anything else is left money to be central or LEA level. And I would say that the Rhode Island Chart of Accounts is another example of this. Specify objects or functions and code them to schools. And then what we've done here is to put a list of considerations or concerns on the table, and I think that some things you want to think about. So what to do if you have functions or objects or programs that aren't consistently delivered or managed. So it may be the case that one central office, one school district, for instance, hires a special ed provider to do speech therapy and pays a flat fee. But your state has said speech therapy is a service that's delivered at the school. I would like that in the school's school level, code at the school level. So they may have a hard time saying, well, how do I parse that across the schools when I'm paying a flat fee? It could be more onerous for some LEAs to separate central from school level. And there are a lot of, some states will have a lot of charters who may not be making a traditional separation between LEA and school level. Weighted student formula districts, so there may be districts where they're giving a dollar amount out to certain schools, and then for the district to then account for the different spending categories at the school level could be onerous for them. So there's quite a bit of a discretion in how the weighted student formula funds are spent, and some of them may be spent on certain objects and some of them may not be, so it would impose another on-the-top accounting method. Districts where they only have one school, sometimes that separation can be very difficult. Online providers where they're going to have a really different way of delivering their services, any other kinds of non-traditional, some of these potentially schools for incarcerated students and things like that. They may have a difficult time with that. So that's one thing to think about. Some schools, I know we've just been working with one that uses a contractor to teach music, and then if the state model said you must exclude benefits from the school level calculation, do they take out a portion of the contractor's benefit cost and sort of, it can get tricky. So that's one thing to consider, and I think it may you may be able to look at your schools and districts in your state and decide whether or not that's going to be a legitimate problem or not in your state and how to handle it. And you also may need an apportioning methodology for LEAs that do share or centralize some of those objects or functions. Like, let's say there's one reading coach in the district, and they said reading coaches are something that belong at the school level. Then they should say, should I just put it out on a per pupil basis? Should I put it out just across reading classrooms? Is it just an elementary function? Things like that. We already talked about the online classes. And I would say that Rhode Island does have a very clear apportioning methodology for some of these functions, and can be a way to look at how they've done that and to see if that would work in your state. And I'm going to go through this as kind of like the meat of our presentation today. But feel free to raise your hand and stop me if you have a question. But I will put some time at the end of the slide to open it up to talk about it. But the second one, and we've heard about this in a couple places, is to specify a set of conditions for when the costs are going to be reported at the school level. For instance, maybe when staff are assigned solely to the school. That's a condition, right? It's less about the function or the object, and it's only like if a staff is 100% full-time at a school, we assign them there. And that could be a condition. Another condition might be when the school has some sort of level of control over the dollars, or the control over the expenditure, meaning that the teacher reports to the principal instead of like maybe the special ed staff member reports to a central office. So it may be a kind of a reporting category. And both of these have some rationale. First of all, the first one there is one that people have simpler data on. The second one, sort of aligns with an idea that well, why don't we only report the stuff to the school that the school has some control over, like that the school manages? But if there are things that are, if you have staff members that are reporting to central office departments, then should schools, quote unquote, be held accountable for the amount of spending that they don't control? So that's a sort of a theory approach there. As far as considerations and concerns, the LEAs may report substantially different portions of their funds at the school level, which would make the data incomparable across districts, right? So one school district may have a lot of part-time staff that are assigned to multiple schools, or have a lot of their staff assigned to central departments. Suddenly it looks like they're not spending very much money at the schools at all, which could be difficult there. It may be the case that while that might work really well in some districts, in some places their existing accounting structure may not map onto things like control or assignment or stuff like that. So those are some considerations and concerns to think about as you consider that option. And the third one is for the state to be neutral, to say, like, I'm not going to specify what's at the school level and what's at the central office level, or what's coded directly to schools, but I am going to ask that everybody apportion all their central costs, and that way I can just compare the totals across the total public spending by school. And Colorado, in the last webinar, gave a little bit of an example of that. I would say that the Ohio's existing chart of accounts looks a little bit like this, and we can talk more about those in a moment. But here are the considerations and concerns: is that you'll need a methodology to, or at least LEAs will, to apportion all their central office money. And Ohio has one, so it says that if it's not at the school level, you'll have to code it the following way to assign it to schools. And it could be as simple as any centrally managed money will be divided among all pupils and assigned to all schools. Or it could be more complex and say that certain costs, if they only benefit high schools, will be assigned to the high schools. Certain costs, if they only benefit special ed students, will be assigned to special ed students, and so on. And it does allow that the data are more comparable potentially across all types of schooling. So if you have a charter school that pays a fee to a central provider, you don't really have to parse services so much, but you can just include that fee and you get the total cost. At the same time, maybe it's not as much detail inside the data. You will see, and this is a concern that's been raised by some of the equity folks, there'll be less visibility and variation due to school staffing. So you might see, as we've seen in some of the examples, one school spends $6,000 at the school level plus another $6,000 in central for a total of $12,000. If you're comparing the $12,000 number to, let's say, a $12,500 or a $13,000, that variation across schools may not look as great as if you were just comparing it to the smaller number, which was like the 6,000 or the 7,000. So if your goal is to kind of highlight variation in spending, maybe inequities due to school staffing, it may not be as apparent there. So those are our big approaches there, and we do imagine, and I'll jump through some examples of these in a moment, but that there will be states that are using some kind of hybrid. And I'll say that we noticed that up in this top row, that you do have to have an allocation methodology that's very specific if schools are sharing or if they're centrally managed funds or expenditures. And at the bottom one, you could develop a methodology, or you could ask districts to develop a methodology. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what an apportioning methodology would look like. So whether you were doing this at the state level or the LEA level, you might choose a methodology that has some of all of your money allocated out or apportioned out by ADM or attendance or enrollment or something like that, or even weighted students based on the number of weighted students you have. you have some money that's apportioned just by student subgroup, like we talked about. If you have a central office that's a special education department, do you take those funds and divide them out by subgroup, or do you just say, I'm going to divide all my central functions by all the students? You might do it by grade level. Maybe there's a department that does professional development for elementary school, or you have security, but you know that you're only really providing security for the high schools. You may have student utilization as a basis for apportionment. So how many students use transportation at each school, they get their share. Then the portion of transportation assigned to their schools based on the number of kids on the bus, or the number of kids taking online classes, or the number of kids who go on field trips or do music lessons, or who knows what. Sometimes you're looking at operational costs that you might divide out by square footage. Sometimes you may not want to, because you don't really, your goal is to not have schools look like they're spending different amount of money because one has a bigger, older building or something. You might also divide the central funds by salaries. You can imagine if you had a benefits cost that you need to apportion out, or a HR sort of department, and you want to divide those out by salaries. But these are the kinds of like denominators that you could divide by if you're either very specifically choosing an apportioning strategy at the state level, or asking districts to do it, and this is what districts might do. So let's go forward a little bit. I wish I could put both these in front of you, but remember we had number one was the first approach was the SEA specifies objects or functions and says these are the only things we want to see coded to schools. And then number two was, well, it depends on some other condition. It's not a function or an object, but it's more like if the staff are solely assigned to a school, or if the school has control over the dollars. So there's a condition in place. And the third is, the state is neutral and says every district can code the way that it makes sense in your district, but you are going to apportion all your money, all your central money in some sort of mechanism, so we get a grand total, and that's what we're going to compare. So if those are the three models, Rhode Island would be an example of number one, where the chart of accounts has a very specific set of instructions about which objects and functions and programs can be coded to this school level. And the idea here, and Cindy, you can correct or add on if you like, is that the idea is that if the cost serves students, it better be at the school level. So transportation is at the school level, a lot of services are at the school level. But if it's more business related, and that actually includes the superintendent's salary, kind of the finance functions, then that's coded to the central office. And there is an allocation methodology assigned to every object code. So contracted nurses, for instance, if there's a single bill for that, then there is a means to apply those costs out to schools. And there's a weighted students methodology for that. So that would be an example of number one.
So if I can jump in, Marguerite, this is Cindy.
Good.
So I would say overall, yes. Our chart of accounts is very prescribed. However, when we say business related, as you mentioned, even the superintendent is at central office, and that's because we differentiate the building level being sort of that educational space with a principal as the instructional leader, as opposed to the central office where you've got your you still have leadership, but it's more of the chief executive officer, the running of a district, rather than the day-to-day instructional operation. Certainly they handle policy at central and things of that nature. So both central leadership and business leadership is at central. And we do have allocation methodologies assigned. We only have about 6, I believe, or 7 that are allowed. So they're very prescribed, and the object code, when an object allows an allocation, and not all of them do, but when it does, it also prescribes which allocation method, so that we know that the costs are being distributed in the same way. And so contracted nurses might be one. When the nurse is coming in as a sub or a contractual service and probably servicing across the school. And so in that case, we want to make sure that we're not specifically tracking how much time at each school, that we're using the student method, for instance. So each object has a method. Not everyone allows it, and so it'll say it's direct required, meaning they have to code the expense directly to a school level or a central level, or direct preferred, in which case it will tell them which allocation code, and it's actually at the state level when a file is done for the year that the state does the actual allocation of that file using our own system here.
Yeah, I would say it's remarkably consistent, and I think the data you pulled from the districts showed that and this is a testament to how long you've had it in place and how much training and sort of iteration you've done on it. But it's the closest sort of example we could find to this number one. So I wanted to kind of highlight it here.
Sure, I would say there's probably a little bit of the number two mix in it as well. But certainly that first bucket is the focus for us.
Yeah, and so give me an example of what you mean by the number, how is the number two mixed in?
Okay, can you just flip back to that slide so I can look at your wording?
Yeah, so we don't have to this one?
Yes. So when you say specifying a set of conditions, if we look at personnel costs, that's very specific. So if staff are assigned to that school solely, then they're tracked at that school level, but sometimes you're going to have that itinerant teacher, right, who's initially set up at the central office, but they're serving students in the schools. So they may, for the first quarter, get a, have them coded at a central office, but then they need to move them down once they know the schedule, because they're not servicing kids at the central office, they're servicing the kids in the seats. So it's probably a mix of the two. But the one underlying rule we have when it comes to wages, any line item that has to do with wages, is there is no allocation of wages per se. It has to be directly mapped, and then they can allocate benefits that follow the wages. And so we think that gives greater accuracy of those costs.
Right. I think that makes sense. And I think the other thing that's sort of relevance for Rhode Island is that a lot of the stuff is coded to the school, more than we'll see in some of these other models. And by having so much coded to the school, then it maybe takes out some of the gray area for other kinds of things. Like, since you have benefits coded to the school that way, then there's more of a comparison. For instance, if a district's using a contractor for something, because when you use a contractor, the salary and the benefits are lumped into one fee, and you could still do that. So I think that's part of what's going on there. Okay, well we had a couple other examples, and we can kind of go through these together, but then also sort of revisit them, because I think, what, I took my best guess at this. I have to tell you that it's not like I know everybody's model particularly well. We were just trying to create a set of buckets that could help people sort of think about the nuance of the decisions in front of them. And so we then also looked at Mississippi, which I categorize a little bit more of a hybrid of 1 and 3. And then it does specify some functions that must be coded to the school level. But it says that all other expenditures beyond the specified functions are at the discretion of the LEA, which puts it, and then, that Mississippi was able to take all the other LEA coded things, divide them out, and add them on to the school level costs with some sort of consistency. And you saw Mississippi's example of that at our last webinar. Do we have anyone on from Mississippi? I'm not sure we do. And this would be my fault for not sort of giving them a heads up that I was going to revisit this with them. But that's where I would put Mississippi. Okay, and then another one, Ohio. I think that could be number 3. There is a chart of accounts but the LA, and there's a code in there that you can use for location, but the LEA has discretion on whether or not it wants to assign expenditures to schools. But the code is in there, so it's pretty easy for everybody to roll it all up. There are some methodologies for parsing anything that's coded centrally when you want to get a full cost of each school, and that's defined in there. So I think Ohio, if I understand it correctly, would be an example of the third bucket where there's more discretion at the LEA, but the rule is that you've got to add it all in there. And as we read the regulations for the guidance for this, which we'll go over again in more detail at another webinar, but it sounds like all these methods are legitimate. They're really up to the discretion of the SEA. Any comments or questions on those so far? All right, and you can always use your question box as well if you have some. And so maybe one question is, where do you start? And as we've been modeling here, we would suggest to start by looking at the data in your state. This is going to be a quick timeline to meet this requirement, and you can make changes over time and over how you report your data. But the right methodology might emerge when you look at the range of the districts that you have or the LEAs. Do you have a lot of charter schools? Do you have a lot of more innovative or non-traditional schooling going on? Do you already have a data structure in place that gives some clear guidance on what to parse and when? Are you looking? Is it going to be really onerous for LEAs to meet one method versus another? So that seems like a great place is to actually start by looking at the data and examine that range across all the LEAs. But the other question we had was, ask what you want to do with the data. And you might remember that we started out with this great opportunity in this data is to really try to connect people's spending with outcomes. And you could say, I want a really good, big, comparable number across all schools that takes into account all the public funds, and I want people to feel accountable that this much money was spent on behalf of these kids, and these are the outcomes. So I really want to look at the number that captures the most spending possible, which might be option 3. If you say, I really want to look for at how, like, the differences in how each school or LEA is spending their money and dig into that, then you may want to look at option number 1. If you're trying to encourage your LEAs maybe to shift more control in money down to their schools, you may want to think about the control issue or something like that. If your data just aren't there yet, you may end up being stuck in one bucket that you don't think is the best fit for the long term. But that doesn't mean you can't change later, because with ESSA, even though you'll have to have some sort of uniform procedure, which could be any one of those or a hybrid, you can also change that uniform procedure at any time. So that's where we suggested starting. I know we just have one more reminder about the in-person meeting and then some other reminders, but I want to stop and give you all a chance for questions or comments if you have them. All right. Well, we'll make the slides in the webinar available also. So if you have thoughts, model fits in, feel free. We can always do that. Okay. Let's move on. I think Katie's got some in-person meeting reminders and next steps for you all.
Yep, great. Thanks, Marguerite. So as you all are aware, we will be meeting in person February 9th in DC for a full day of meetings and programming. about this group. We'll be meeting in the morning as a large group with CIOs that are a part of the CCSSO CIO network. And then we will be meeting in the afternoon in smaller group sessions that are more targeted. So there'll be some things that are more specific to states that are a little bit further along. There'll be some things that are specific to LEAs. It'll be, we think, pretty great programming for everyone, but there will definitely be some personalization as well in those afternoon sessions, as well as just a great opportunity to network with one another and with the other partners or, other organizations who will be there to help you through this process. Any questions about the in-person, you can go ahead and put on the question board, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. Otherwise, I'll keep moving forward. You'll be hearing from me, I'm sure, next week at some point with some more updates as well. And then just a couple of next steps and reminders. So our next call will be on February 1st. We're going to restrict that call to office hours only. So it's a great opportunity to join, if you have any questions about what we went through today, if you want to talk about your individual state context and talk through maybe where you fall on that chart that Marguerite showed of the 3 different buckets, and think through, if you're in bucket 2, but you want to be bucket 1, what do you need to change, those sorts of things. It can be very personalized. And if you want to have that kind of meeting, you're welcome to also send me a note with some ideas or materials, anything like that you'd like us to cover during the office hours. That's kind of your time. So we'll be on from 1 to 2:30 on that day. But if people don't let us know they're coming, or if you don't join early, then we won't know to stay on. So just make sure you let us know that you're going to come, and if you have any materials you want to share, and then also what time you plan to join. As always, as Marguerite mentioned, the slides and recorded call will be available on our FitWay website, which is posted right there within a couple of hours. I would say, by the end of the day today, it's usually up. And then if you have any other questions, comments, things that you want to discuss as a broader group, not just sending to me, you are always welcome to use that FitWay blog. So I'll create a post that says, comments from today's webinar, and you can make any comments, ask any questions. If your state was featured today, or if your state wasn't featured and you want to share material that you have with other states, that's always a great place to do it. So feel free to interact using that resource as well.
Great, and when you get the slides, you'll see that we put these links in here. So you can see the Ohio allocation rules defined and the Rhode Island chart of accounts and manual. So those are in the slides if you want to take a link to those and read them. But just also remember one last thing is, we've challenged a lot of you to kind of explore your data and send it to us, and we are learning a lot about the range data and the issues that came. A lot of you have sent us a little note about, well, we came across this issue or this issue. So if you haven't done it yet, we encourage you to go ahead and do this and submit it to the FitWay blog. But I know we may also at this moment start having other people join for the second hour. It's the same line. If you want to stay on, you're welcome to. It's going to be a little bit more about where to start if you don't have any data. And but if you want to sign off, you're welcome to do that too. And our question box is open, so feel free to jot us a note if you have a question or a comment at all. And thanks you all. Yeah, for those who are staying on, we'll get started in a couple minutes. In fact, I am going to switch out on the PowerPoint, and so you'll see me do that. I think maybe I should stop sharing my thing as I do this. But we'll be here. Hi everyone, if you're joining just for the second hour, we will get started in a moment. We're in a little bit of a transition from hour number 1 to hour number 2. And so give us a moment as we flip over. Hi everyone. We are starting our second hour of webinar here, and this hour is dedicated a little bit more to states that don't have any data yet, not exactly sure how to start. And so I think we're ready to just go ahead and jump in. If you know, as always, well, here I'll do our official how to communicate, but Katie, do you want to give us a heads up on that?
Sure. So everyone is currently in listen-only mode. That is normal. If you want to participate, if you want to speak, please use the hand raise tool, and then we can unmute you and you can contribute. If you don't want to speak and you want to contribute, you can also use the question box, and whatever you post in that question box will get sent to everyone, and then we will also be preserving the questions. So I take note of them, and then we post the questions online as well after the call. So they will be preserved if you do ask the question in that space. So hand raise tool or ask the question if you want to participate.
Excellent. So today's agenda, we are going to go through a little bit quickly around the timeline for meeting the transparency requirement. And again, you know, there are some immediate action items, so we didn't want folks to sort of stall out for too long if you don't have any data. So we're going to be focusing really on that issue here today. And what to do if you're still looking for data. We're going to do a little bit of an SEA round robin, meaning that for those of you who are on, we'd love if you wouldn't mind figuring out a point person for each of you just to say where you are in terms of finding data, what you may or may not already have. And it could be 1 minute, or you could say, pass, I'm just not ready to talk about it. That's fine. And then we've invited Stephen Kornman on from the Department of Ed, and he can tell us what he's been working on with a SLFS survey. And this survey has collected some school-level data from a whole bunch of states, and so this will be a great option for states that don't yet have a system in place to collect school-level data. He's learned quite a bit about that process for how do you how can you get the LEAs to answer questions and produce data that's reliable and comparable across districts. So we'll share some of that and do a little review of the in-person meeting and our next steps. But just to kick it off with a meme, no data for you is our, of course, soup Nazi reference here, which is what do you do if you're tasked with doing this and you don't yet have data? Never fear, it's not a permanent condition. We know you're going to get data eventually, so don't panic. But I'll just jump back a little bit, which is that you may remember from earlier webinars, we put states into 4 boxes. Box number 1 on the left, that blue box, was if the SEA has a common chart of accounts, including a field for location. That meant that districts were already doing some work on parsing their finances by school level, and certainly a place that getting school level data seemed like an easier task. So that we talked about a lot of the districts in the last hour. That's that bucket. Bucket number 2 is the SEA has SLFS or similar data by school. As I mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later in the hour, that the school level finance survey data can be a great place to start, even if you don't have any kind of consistent accounting methodology across your state. You may find that districts have already been able to kind of pull into their systems and grab data and code them appropriately. And some of those are states that are in this working group, like Colorado and DC and Maryland. It may be a state where you have some sort of state file that has real salaries or benefits personnel. And remember, salary and benefits can be 80% of a district's expenditures, and so it's a really strong place to start if you have that file with location code in it. And a few of you have that data, and that's a potential place to start as well. Or you might feel like you don't yet have access to financial information at all. And so we really wanted to focus on these 3 because these 3 groups today are ones that may not have been able to really quite make progress yet. But we did want to just do a little bit of a reminder for the timeline for meeting the per pupil expenditure requirement by school. And right now, you have to meet the deadline by June 2019. That's a regular deadline. You would need to be reporting on 2017-18 school year data, which means that, come this summer, school districts will need to be capturing information by school level for the next school year so that you can meet that deadline. Which means that if they need instructions before the school year starts, they need those instructions now, or sometime between now and the summer. Or if you apply for an extension and it's approved, you actually have a year longer to meet that deadline. And as far as we can understand from the regulation, that means you would get a pass on the 2017-18 data and only need to do your beginning data collection on the 18-19 school year. But if you're going to meet the regular deadline, that means that this winter and spring in 2017, you want to examine your data runs, like whatever you have, decide whether to apply, that you need to apply for that waiver, and if not, start deciding on some kind of collection strategy. And that could mean that you're going to parse your existing data for your collecting strategy, and you might parse existing data if you do already have SLFS data. We'll talk a little bit about that. It means you might want to parse your existing data if you do already have all of your salaries of all employees in school districts, or even just your certificated salaries by school. So you can say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the data I do have, I'm going to parse it, and that's what I'm going to make as the beginning of my school level information. And again, we really want you to go do that and do some data runs to see what that's going to look like, to make sure that that's going to be doable for you. You might say, I'm going to collect new site level data from districts. I don't have any yet, but I'm going to say that's what I want to do. I want to get a survey out there or some new kind of collection that I'm going to put in place, in which case I'm going to need to signal to my LEAs, I need to do this collection. So make sure you've got the data and you're not missing your chance to collect it during the school year. Or you may say, guess what, I want to implement a new statewide chart of accounts or some revision to my existing chart of accounts, which adds a location code. And that is a strategy that I know from some of you that you're interested in. At the same time, that'll take some work because, as Rhode Island has and others have talked a lot about, it takes a lot of training to get all the different districts to use the chart of accounts, or even to make revisions to your existing chart of accounts and put a school code in there. So Assuming you have no extension, those choices have some implications. If new data are to be collected or parsed by LEAs, then by the summer you want to communicate the new requirements, train your LEAs on new procedures, and start to begin drafting some kind of uniform procedure. In our last hour, we talked a little bit more about the beginning of that, but we can talk about that a little bit more in the future. But I think right now you're like, how do I get my hands on data? And for the 2017-2018 school year, you would want to make sure that districts were recording expenditures using that new procedure, and potentially you would be refining that as issues surface during the school year. And then that leaves one additional school year for you to assemble and potentially validate your data, and start developing the visual per pupil expenditure SEA and LEA reports. So there is a bit of urgency on this timeline here. And so let's go back and look at this data again. So we said that, on the left, in the kind of the light blue, those are states with a common chart of accounts that includes a field for location. If you're one of those states, at this point, you're probably thinking about developing a procedure to parse your existing chart of accounts or layer on new requirements for LEAs on their existing chart of accounts. So that's a little bit more what we talked about in the last hour. But if you're in box 2, 3, or 4, you may be looking at some different steps ahead. So if you're in box number 2, you might think, well, if I already have SLFS, which is the school level finance survey, then perhaps what I can do is start expanding that, making sure that all my LEAs are covered in it, and then start developing some sort of procedure to assemble that data, or the data is based on the SLFS variables. So, and you'll know if you're participating in it how viable that is. If you're not participating, like I said, you'll get to hear from Stephen Kornman a little bit in just a moment. He's going to tell us a little bit more about that survey. If you're in this bucket of, I have real salaries and benefits of personnel, you might think, I could try to build on that, develop some procedure that begins by parsing those data across schools. I may choose to then go out and ask LEAs for a little bit more information if I want to try to capture more at the school level, but that is one place I could be starting right now if I have that. If you do not have access to any financial information, you're in this last bucket, you might choose to adopt a new chart of accounts, go kind of bypass these other options and go straight toward doing that. It will probably be a multi-year effort, and those take some time getting going. But you could also potentially start a new collection. You could say, well, I think, I want to move over to box number 3 where some of those data are going to be handy if I ask for them. Or you could go to box number 2, which is learn from what the SLFS collection has done and say, I'm just going to issue a survey, and I'm going to issue a survey with the categories that they've put in place and start collecting my data that way. So you really have a lot of options here, but you kind of got to move on one of them for sure. And that brings us to our immediate next steps. If you don't have data yet, I think your smartest first question is, will your SEA apply for an extension? And for those of you who want to apply for an extension, if it's yes, the right route to go is to contact your Office of State Support, OSS, to inform them and get updated on the process. And I don't think the process has been released yet, but you'd want to let them know. And it looks like sometime in the next few months you would develop, you would submit that application and get that approved. At the same time, we would suggest you start developing some sort of pilot that you would be implementing, the pilot for 2017-18, so you can roll it out to all districts for the 18-19 school year. So that would be if you need an extension, that would be the route you might go. If no, you want to sort of, even if your data aren't totally there, you think you can proceed with something, then your best bet is start analyzing your existing data, seeing what you can pull out from that data and that might be your SLFS data, your personnel data. See if you can sort of start to populate those tables that we've produced. And in winter and spring of 2017, develop a data collection tool, potentially survey all your districts, see what you can collect from the 15-16 school year as you start to develop some sort of uniform procedure on the data that you do have. So remember, I just dumped a whole lot on you, but feel free to type in a question or to raise your hand if you have a comment that you want to share. And I'll pause here for a second as people give people a chance to do that. Okay, and this is just a little bit of a recap, but some potential things you could do right off the bat, some quick wins. You know, survey your LEAs, check on their data availability. Would you be able to populate this chart? See if they have any requests, and look at your current school level accounting procedures to see what's in there. Potentially review your functions and objects and determine what would be school level or district level if you based on that data. Number 3, rework your existing financial data collection tool to allow, like if some states have a chart of accounts, there is a school level code in there, but they have not used the school level code to roll up their data to the state. You might be able to rework the existing financial collection mechanism so that you can leave that school level data in there. And see if that's the way you can build on this. And then begin analyzing data from a subset of your districts. I think those are the ways you can make some big progress, and sort of the path for your state will become a lot more clear if you jump in on those. But we thought it might be worthwhile to do some SEA round robin updates. And you can answer any one of these questions. Have you learned? Have you done any kind of data inventory? What do you have? What do you not have? Have you reached out to any LEAs? What have you learned from any attempt to populate some of the data in those initial tables we've been proceeding? Have you thought anything about a uniform procedure? Here's your chance to say, kind of where you are. And Katie or Laura, do you have a way to kind of go around the group? Maybe you just raise your hand if you're ready to comment.
This is Katie. I see that we have South Dakota, Illinois, Nebraska, Maryland, Virginia, Hawaii, and Oregon on the call today. So sorry if I missed you, but anyone is welcome to contribute at any point. So we'd love to just hear from you, hear where you are. It also helps us with our programming and content if we hear from you and know what you're doing. So let us know.
If you don't want to chime in from your state, feel free to type that into the question box, and then and we know that you're not up for it.
So Deb with Illinois, I believe. We've gone ahead and unmuted you.
Yeah, this is Deb from Illinois, and we do have a very detailed chart of accounts for all of our school districts, where we get instructional salaries, support services, business office services, principal services, superintendents, and that there. So I think we can easily go into a school level, but we haven't begun to collect it at the school level yet. We're just going to have to start to define what will be at the school level and what will be at the district or central level, basically, of the school district. That's how I'm understanding everybody to be said. Amongst the states, you kind of define it amongst each SEA. So we're in the process now of working on that and redeveloping our system. We had started that before this SEA requirement for transparency's sake in Illinois. But I think we can get there, but it is going to take us a little time and training for school districts to get them, if you will, to a cost accounting allocation of some of the expenditures, such as your reading coaches and such like that. Do we want to keep that at the central level or have districts allocate that to a school level? And charter schools will be a big discussion for us as well.
Well, Deb, I don't know if you were on the previous hour, but the previous hour we did touch on that. So if you are thinking of going that route, you may want to go back and watch the recorded webinar, because we talked about a few different approaches to doing that. Some that are easier or harder depending on where you're starting.
Right. No, I was on the previous one too, and that's where we're going to have to get in to decide how much of a degree do we want, or do we want to keep a lot of those at the central level. Right now, our charter schools, some are school districts that pay tuition directly to the charter school for the services of their students in a charter school, and we have some charter schools that are basically operated at the state level, and we collect their annual audits, but they are not required to send in right now a chart of accounts of the same format as school districts do. So we're going to have to touch base on that as well.
Well, and you may be a good candidate for that option number 3 in the previous webinar, because you have some difference in accounting going on. So then you don't have to decide what is school level and what is central. You can say, you guys can decide, what works at your district, but you got to layer in all the money, which means that if a school district is paying a fixed $10,000 to a charter school, they can just report that $10,000, and yet for their own schools, they can parse some of the money sent to the school and leave some of the money central, so that it adds up to a total number, and you're just looking at that. So you may be a good candidate for the option 3, given your sort of the complexity in your state.
And with that being said, though, in one of the earlier meetings that I was on, basically, I understood, and I may have misunderstood, that it could be the state's decision to determine how it's done, as long as it's consistent among all the school districts in the state. If we allow each school district to make that decision, how will we get to that consistency level?
Well, it depends on what you'll get is consistency in the total amount spent on behalf of each school, not on what it was spent on. So I think what you find is that, like, if you're a school, so what you're basically saying is you want schools and districts to kind of hash it out with each other on what should be assigned to their school. So if the school, let's say, the obvious stuff is located at the school level, and that sums to, let's say, $5,000, but there's another $7,000 per pupil that's left at the central, we would expect over time the schools to say, hey, look, you're only giving me $5,000 of my $12,000. So you need to be showing us a little bit more of that other $7,000. And I think leaving that discussion up to some of the schools and districts to sort of hash out might make more accountability in that money than actually telling them what's in each bucket, right? I'm thinking of places like Chicago Public Schools and stuff like that, or some of the bigger districts in your state like Naperville and things like that will have still a lot of money central, and you could say that it's the job of the SEA to kind of decide what's central and what's not, or you could say, which will be hard with these charter schools, right, where there's nothing that's central. They're doing it all, or they're just paying a flat fee, or you could say, I'm just going to show the total amount, and I know that's going to cause a little bit of unrest in some of these districts, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So when one school says, what do you mean I spent $12,000? I don't use any of that central stuff. Well, that's for them to kind of decide. We want that tension in a way. I think Illinois might be a good candidate for number 3, but we can talk about that more later. I'm not sure everybody was on there, but let's jump to some of these others. But I have a good sense of where you are. I think thank you for the update, Deb.
Thank you.
And it looks like we have Jennifer Jordan from Missouri who would like to give an update. Jennifer, you're unmuted, so you should be able to talk now.
Hi, this is Jennifer Jordan from Missouri, and it sounds like we're in a very similar situation to Illinois. We have a common chart of accounts that districts have used for years. We do not have a tool to collect the information at a building level. We need to work on our reporting tool to accommodate that. And we need to have some discussions here on school building versus central office, what we think should go where, and have some conversations with school districts regarding that. I have had a conversation with Stephen Kornman, and we do not currently do the school level financial survey, but we are intending to incorporate that into this as well. I think some of our next steps are just deciding here building level versus central office and how we want to give direction to the school districts. Having some conversation with our vendors in the state. It sounds like a lot of the school districts have the option of building level identification within their vendor packages, and we just need to have some further conversations regarding that and how we can use what's already being reported within the district.
So am I correct that you have a common chart of accounts, but that common chart of accounts doesn't have a common site location code yet,
right.
But vendors offer that option?
It sounds like there is the option with the vendors in the state of a location code. We do not currently collect the data based on a location code, and it doesn't sound like we have a common location code between what the school districts are using as location code and what we use here as a building code, and we need to do some work on crosswalking that.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think similar to the conversation with Illinois, you could choose to march forward and tell people how things will be coded at the school and what things will be coded central. Or you could say, we're not quite ready to take that on. We're just going to ask that anything that's not coded to the not coded to the school gets layered on in the way you've seen in some of the examples, so that we can get a grand total and we have visibility into what's not coded to the school level, so that that the individual schools can say, what do you mean? I got $7,000 per pupil in central, and sort of march forward with that. But that sounds like you said, you've got something to build on, and the task of getting to a more complete system won't be like starting from scratch.
No, definitely not starting from scratch.
Do you know yet how many of your districts are using that school code?
No, we know what schools use which vendors, and we're hoping to schedule some conversations with the vendors and make some further identification from that point.
That's a good idea, because they can give you, that's a great idea. I think the approaching the vendors is a smart next step.
And that's,
Thanks,
I think,
Jennifer.
all.
We also had Mike from Oregon chime in the comments or the question section, so hopefully everybody can see that. But he shared that they started a review of data and procedures and are determining next best steps and the centralized services expenses and what should go in that bucket, and how to account for that is the biggest challenge at this time. So similar to what some other folks are expressing. And like Marguerite said, that was the first hour of our call today. It was pretty heavily focused on how to parse those central expenditures, the different allocation methods. So that will be posted if you didn't attend. That'll be online hopefully by the end of the day today if you want to watch that first hour.
Yeah, and I think that in the guidance that was just released, which we'll do some more on in these webinars, they made it clear that you don't have to say, you don't have to make that decision about what goes at the school level and what goes at the central level. That your other option is to say, I'm going to report anything that's not at the school level, I'm going to just divide it out and add it in. That is a very clear option. Which if this task of kind of creating uniformity in what school and what central doesn't seem to work in your state, you have that other option. So just a reminder that that's possible, and maybe it might be the right place to start for some states if that task of getting uniformity in what central and what school level is too big or not practical for the kinds of districts that you have. Anybody else, Katie, that we wanted to have weigh in?
I don't see any. Oh, maybe one more person. Let me see. Jabs, I'll unmute you and you can jump back in.
Just a quick question. If we started the option number 3 where the districts basically determine the school level and the central level, should we continue working on it so that it's defined at the state level as we go forward? Do you see where it may be developed later that it may have to be uniform throughout all school districts in the state? Or
no, I don't think that you have to aspire for that. I mean, I think in some places that'll never work very well because it may be the case that for what that your district, that you have districts that don't follow kind of a uniform manner of applying services, right? You could imagine districts that were sort of used the homeschooling model or something like that, and so to say what was at the school and what was at central, or if you have a districts that have one school and maybe the superintendent also teaches algebra, like parsing all this stuff is really about is a fool's errand really. And so what you want is to look at your total expenditures that went out on behalf of schools, whether they were central or school level, and be able to compare that number. And in my mind, personally, that's the clear value in this data. At the same time, there's a case to be made, and people have made it. While I want to look at like the school level control over money, or I want to look at I want to be able to strip things off that create uneven spending between districts, maybe transportation or food services or building costs. And so I don't want that in there. I think you can look at this honestly from both perspectives and say, I want to look at the total public funds that went out on behalf of the kids in a particular school. Because if they're really high or they're really low, we should know that these either we didn't give the school or the organizations like the district that served the school the same amount of money as other ones, or maybe we didn't give them as much money, but their outcomes are so good that we need to replicate this model. Maybe they've gone to no transportation, but their student outcomes are amazing. Or maybe they've gone to, some sort of homeschooling combination, and it's a rural district, and what costs a lot of money in other rural districts, they're able to, for a much lower cost, get much greater outcomes for their students. In the end, we may want to know that. Or you may want to say, that's not where we are. We have central services that we think have nothing to do with the kids that were there. We want to be able to strip them off. So I think you can fairly say there are different routes to go. And I get really excited about saying, well, let's look at all the money that went out on behalf of a set of kids, whether some of it landed at a central office or not. Because I think that will force more eyes on the central office if we can capture that money in the school level number. But there are other people who are, equally excited about really just digging more into how the spending was done and would come out differently on that. So we were leaving it open, but I don't think you have to aspire to be any one of those boxes at all in the end. I think all 3 of those boxes that we had in the last webinar are fair and legitimate ways to think about this.
Thank you.
Did we have any other?
I think that was it. Yeah.
I think that Shannon from Virginia, you may have raised your hand, and I may have unraised it on accident. So just wanted to give you a chance if you had something to add.
I am calling from an LEA's perspective. So I don't know that I really have the knowledge base to talk from the state's perspective. But
okay.
I can tell you some of the difficulties that we have. Theoretically, it shouldn't be a problem, to come up with an allocation method. It will just be getting all 132 divisions to agree on a method, or state telling us what the method would be. But then our chart of accounts, we have a project code that many of us use as a location code, but it's also used for other projects that we want to track dollars spent by. So it's not a foolproof segment of our chart of accounts to be able to use. So, I think we would have some significant software issues to come up with at the locality level to be able to do this.
I think that's important, and this is, I think, why we're encouraging SEAs to talk with their LEAs, to get a sense of how onerous or difficult it will be to go some of these different routes. I know that most LEAs do have a salary file that sort of says where everybody works and how much they're paid, and that's often a place to start. That might be an easier path to think about this, but that's interesting that you have a project code and some of you are using it as a location code. I bet that's more common than we know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I have another question while I have you on the phone and have your ear. The meeting in D.C., is that more for SEAs than LEAs to go to?
We actually are hoping that SEAs and LEAs will come and have a separate session in the afternoon for LEAs. So
okay, even those of us that have yet to start.
Yeah, even if
okay.
those of you have yet to start, I think this is the way. Come to this meeting is a way to keep the momentum going for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Donita has her hand up. I'll go ahead and unmute you if you'd like to join the conversation.
Yeah, Kent Dickey, Virginia. Helpful discussion today. I think we're in a similar place as some of the other states that have commented. We'll continue to gain momentum, and we have good LEA partners, including Shannon Irvin, who just commented, and several others, and we really want to tap that in Virginia. But we, like everyone else, we've had a district level structure for a number of years that we can really take advantage of as a starting point. But like everyone else, the questions of what should be centrally allocated versus reported at the school level, even using a elementary and secondary chart of account structure that we're currently using at the district level as a starting point, that will be a challenge, but that will be one of our starting places. We're also going to review in detail the school level finance survey structure to see if there's anything we can derive and model after that, and then just continue to tap the LEAs in Virginia, probably through some targeted surveys on ideas and models that some districts are using to track school level expenditures, and we think there are some models out there in Virginia, and also some more state level focus groups where we just sit down at the table and review our current chart of accounts and begin to make some structural adjustments on what may be workable. Obviously, that's really that's got to work in parallel with decisions on from a technology perspective, and going from district level collections to collecting data from almost 2,000 schools in the state, the data load and the technology load that's going to be needed to collect all of that data. So collection protocol and process and how to tap technology and what form the data collection format should take is going to be really critical. So some of the things we're grappling with in Virginia as we move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think I do want to put this question out there for you all that are kind of at this juncture. Just a thinking question. You don't have to have an answer, but if in identifying, if you're the SEA and you identify that this is an SEA, like an LEA function, and this is a school level function for accounting purposes, have you just sent them a message on how they should be orienting their school district, that some things should be done at the school level and some things should be done centrally, when we don't yet know that that's the optimal way of doing things? So I guess that's why I'm a little anxious about this. As soon as you say, you have to account for whatever, we'll say some function, maybe it's reading coaches centrally, then do they all start having reading coaches are assigned to some central department, and you've now structured a service in a particular way that it's locked in that way forever? Or maybe you've done it at the school level when somewhere down the road we find out that actually that's not the optimal way to structure the services. So I just put that out there as a caution, and without that, without knowing that, just be careful that accounting systems can feel like a compliance bit of information that then becomes operationalized into delivery. So, all right, so that's just a thought on that. I don't, maybe we better move on because we have Stephen Kornman here who can tell us a little bit about the school level finance survey, which I think will be useful to you all. And I hope, is he unmuted and you can jump in, Stephen?
Afternoon.
Great, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So as we won't belabor the demand issue, but so NCS developed a new school level finance survey in response to high public demand. And what I really want to get out there today is the pilot school level finance survey, and I'll call it SLFS. It's actually an experiment. And the initial purpose of the SFLS is to see if the personnel and non-personnel finance data can efficiently and effectively be collected at the school level. Now, so it's very important to note that SEAs can participate in the SFLS regardless of whether they can produce data for all variables and data for all schools. So I'll give you a couple of examples of states that are in the survey. I won't name them, but they might be able to produce variables that data for variables at this juncture for only a couple of the variables. We're accepting that. We accept a subset of the schools. We're accepting a subset of the schools out of Colorado and New Jersey. And so, in other words, if an SEA cannot produce data for a few variables or all the schools in the state, this does not preclude your participation in the study. And as an administrative note, in January of this year, we did receive full OMB approval, full OMB clearance on a volunteer basis. So now we're accepting up to 50 states plus DC.
Excellent. I think this is great. This is a way for the NCES to actually to start collecting something that actually is uniform across states. Do you want me to jump on to the next one here?
Yeah, just going to say a couple more things, and then we'll go on to the next slide. The pilot SFLS, it's a little bit different in that we'll talk about the variables in a second, but it's a little bit different in that our philosophy here at NCES is we can only match what you can actually provide. So we spent hundreds of hours actually trying to determine which variables that you can provide. So as we get into the variables, it's important to know that the SFLS is distinguished from the expenditure per pupil requirement in ESSA, in that these variables, they cover a portion of current expenditures at the school level, but not all current expenditures. And current expenditures that are not collected on SFLS include general administration, that's administration at the district level, operation and maintenance of plant expenditures, student transportation expenditures, other business central support services, and food services expenditures. And one of the biggest differences is that SFLS does not collect employee benefits. And so that's a significant portion of current expenditures at the school level. And we'll show you in a couple slides how the difference between what's collected by the F-33 and what's collected by the SFLS. And when you take out benefits and some of these other items that we just went over, there's quite a difference here. So just in terms of the school, the states that are participating in the pilot right now, the respondents that initially committed to submitting FY14 data included 12 SEAs. That was Arkansas, Colorado, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Rhode Island, and South Carolina. Ultimately, 9 SEAs submitted FY14 data. And then respondents that have committed to submitting FY15 data include Alabama, Florida. And so, for example, Florida is just giving us personnel data, some salary data, and they're not able to put in non-personnel data at this time, and that's actually fine with us. Georgia, Hawaii, Montana, Oklahoma, and Wyoming. And Texas has expressed some interest, but is not committed at this time. So now we are open to 50 states, and we can go to the next slide here. I'll just very briefly tell you about the variables, okay? There's just 4 personnel variables, and it's those 4 right up top here. It's the instructional staff salaries, that includes the teachers and the aides, student support services salaries, and number 3, instructional staff support services salaries, number 4, school administration salaries. So this is comes right out of the NCS accounting handbook. It's, for example, the salaries for teachers, aides, and instructional staff. That's function 1,000, object 100. Instructional staff, that's function 2100, object 100.
I think for this group, basically, what Stephen is saying is that, you know, they had just issued this survey, and it very much overlapped with the F-33 survey. When districts got it with these categories, mostly they could answer it broken down at the school level. So you can use the same survey to collect data from your LEAs to meet this transparency requirement, while also weighing into the federal collection, and gives you some way to compare your data across those from other states that have totally different ways of doing accounting. So that they've been pretty successful here at states, when they gave the survey to their districts, were able to get the data.
And that's kind of across the board with these personnel variables. And I really appreciate that there's a couple of LEA people on the line, because in expert panels of both SEA and LEA personnel, they've indicated that collecting the personnel expenditures at the school level is not that problematic. So part one of the you very clearly have the functions and the objects associated with all these variables, and I'll just quickly get to the non-personnel variables. Since we were just going for what there would be a good match, number one, instructional staff support, and that's following functions and objects right out of the NCS Accounting Handbook. Number two, non-technology related supplies and purchase services. Three, technology related supplies and purchase services. Non-technology related equipment and technology related equipment. And so those last two are capital outlays.
Well, do you mind if we jump to the next slide and talk about how
No,
much?
not at all. Not at all. I just wanted to point out the last four on those are just exhibits. We're far less concerned about data for exhibits. If you can only put in data for a couple of those variables and indicate which ones you cannot, that's absolutely fine with us. Most of these states, and just conclusion on this slide, with the personnel variables, we have over, it looks like a 90% reporting rate in the amount of data coming in. So let's go to the next slide. This is very interesting.
Yeah, there it goes. It should pop up.
Okay. All right. So this is sort of hot off the press. I'm just going to set up this slide for us.
Yeah, I think if you jump all the way over to the last two rows, what you find is that in the survey, if you look at a total current expenditures for a district, SLFS, which is how much they were assigning to the school level, was hovering at around, 52%, 41%, sometimes as low as, 36%, meaning only a third of the district's expenditures were visible at the school level using the survey, which puts, you're over 50%, still left as central. But a great place to start, given for a LEA or an SEA that may not have any other data sources, that they're like all in one survey that districts are able to complete. They're getting a capture of 40-50% of the money at the school level, and given that they're not collecting benefits, that's a pretty good number.
And you'll see that only includes 6 variables here. It's the 4 variables, the personnel variables, plus 2 non-personnel variables, and that's the non-technology supplies and purchase services and the technology-related supplies and purchase services. So the others were excluded. Two were excluded because they were capital outlays, and 1 was excluded because there was overlap. So if you added in benefits, certainly this would be higher, probably 20%, 30% higher in each. But that just gives you an idea of how much current expenditures, the percentage being reported at the school level. That would just instantly come from salaries. And on this next slide,
well, I think
real quick.
So just to kind of make that point, because the group on the phone, they're generally trying to figure out, where do I start if I have to meet the federal transparency requirement and I don't have any data maybe. This is one place you could start. You could say, I'm going to sign up to do this survey. The survey, I don't even have to make up my own survey. The categories are pretty set. They're pretty parallel to what districts have already been collecting, and it looks like most districts are able to answer the questions, and I can use the SLFS data as my data set to begin reporting on the school level expenditures. That is an option that you have, and you can see it may not be the best option because it captures only so much of the spending at the school level, but it captures some pretty reliable things, and it is some pretty clean data. So I just want to say, for those of you, still like I'm at a loss on where to start, you can start here. You're not going to be alone. You're going to be with a lot of other states that are collecting data this way, and so you'll have some really rich data there. And and we'll give you the contact information for these folks at the end. But Stephen Corman is extremely helpful and willing to and accommodating to help get you started.
See, I really appreciate that comment, Marie, because we tried to make SFOS consistent with ESSA. For example, the definition of current expenditures, it's the same across ESSA, MPEFs, F33, and SFOS. So if any SEA wants to be involved in the SFOS, if you want to give us variable data on just a few variables, that's fine. We actually do 5 independent reviews of this data. And at this point, it's still a research and development project, so we would contact you if there's problems or anomalies or issues, and we would give more technical help in trying to resolve those issues. Okay. We're not at the point right now where we're doing substantive findings. We're not going to start talking about results at the school level just yet. We're only talking about the quality of the data.
But our SEAs will have to be talking about their school level data. So this is kind of a low. In other words, Stephen is saying this is low risk for you. If you reach out to him, there's no Department of Ed part of this that's a gotcha. Like you could just use the survey and use it to build your own systems that you will report inside your state. They're just doing it as a research project. And we do need to wrap up, but maybe do you want to say one comment? If this slide shows some individual school districts,
okay, yeah,
and their portions there.
Okay, so this slide is very interesting. It's on the far right-hand side. If you take a look at the, and this is just a sampling of districts. This is just dealing with total personnel salaries. So it's just personnel expenditures. And you have on the second to last column there, you have the total personnel salaries in SLFS as a percentage of total current expenditures. And this is just for personnel. And then the last column is the total personnel salaries in F33 as a percentage of total current expenditures. So you're going to see in some states it might be about 15% apart. But in some states, for example, in Warwick, Rhode Island, in Dearborn, Michigan, and in Maine, Portland, Maine, and in Louisiana, particularly in East Baton Rouge, the percentage is almost the same. So for personnel, if you're able to report your personnel right now at the district level, and you take on these reporting just the salaries for those 4 variables that I alluded to before, you can see that your job is almost half done, because it's if it's very close in the amount of the percentage of the total current expenditures, that means you really are working apples to apples here, particularly.
I think that's right. I think that's the point here, is that the data they're getting, it's good data. It is what it says it's capturing. It's capturing. It doesn't have everything. May only have half of the district's total expenditures in the school level pot, which means there's still a lot of things they haven't captured. But the data they've gotten is pretty darn reliable, and even better, districts have been able to do that. So we're at the top of the hour. Sorry, I hate to do this, but we got to just kind of wrap it up. I don't want to lose people without our summary comments. But you'll see we're in the slides are the contact information for Stephen Corman and his team, and you can reach out directly if you like, or through your Office of State Support and so on, around this project. And we also, just a reminder that you can use the SLFS data, you can use your salary data, you can use your existing chart of accounts, maybe even send this out to a few LEAs. We'd love to get some from individual LEAs on a call. Try to fill out this chart, see how close you are. That'll tell us how much capture you have of your data, and we'll be able to calculate what percent of your total expenditures does show up at the school level. And post it to the blog if you can, because we learn a lot from it, and it helps us with our own programming. But other than that, Katie, I'll turn it over to you for our last two reminder slides.
Great, thanks, Marguerite. So as everyone is aware, I assume we have an in-person meeting on February 9th in DC. The invitations have gone out for that. If you have any questions, please just reach out to me via email or give me a call. You should have my contact information. But the programming that day will be a large group with all the CIOs in the CCSSO network and in the morning, and then we're going to split into smaller, more tailored group sessions for the afternoon. So like some folks have asked on the call, there will be LEA-specific sessions. There will be sessions specific to, getting from where you are to where you need to go, depending on your data access and things like that. So we think there'll be something for everyone. We hope you can join. And if you have questions about attending or anything like that, just reach out to me. And our other next steps and reminders, we will have a call on February 1st, but it will be office hours only. So this is a great opportunity. If you have a question that's specific to your state and you want some one-on-one attention with our team, we will do that during the office hours from 1 to 2:30 on February 1st. However, if no one joins at like 1:15 and it's just us, we won't keep it going, we'll close it. So if you want to come and you want to talk about something, just reach out to me and let me know that you are planning to attend and also what time you think you'll want to join. So we are prepared to be there for you. You can also give us any data, materials, anything you want us to review. We're happy to do that and be prepped for you on the 1st, so utilize that as you see fit. The slides and recorded call will be available hopefully by the end of today on that website, which is right there posted for you. And as Marguerite said, please use the blog to share anything with us or with the rest of the group. We check that, and we're looking forward to engaging with you there as well.
Wonderful. So thank you all for coming. Sorry we went just a little bit over here, but reach out to us anytime along the way. We always appreciate hearing from you, and you can tell we're learning a lot from you all. So have a great one and get signed up for the trip, because we can't wait to meet you all in person. So thank you.